If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue.
All right, this is the method of reasoning role question. So what is the method of reasoning role question? Okay, so what do these questions ask for? In other words, what does it mean to identify the role of a statement and argument, and how do these questions appear in the test, and how do we approach these questions? All right, so in terms of the basic information, the method of reasoning role questions basically ask you to identify the function of a given statement. So in evaluating legal reasoning and reasoning in general, you need to be proficient at identifying how the elements fit together. These questions are going to deal with arguments because in order to figure out the function of a statement in an argument, there has to be an argument. And the question will generally deal with one speaker, though there might be multiple perspectives. The answer choices will be the description of the role, and that has to be true. The correct answer choice has to be true. So in terms of the basic approach, you need to identify the relationships between the statement in question and the argument, and then identify the correct description of its function, of the function of that particular statement. So the question is going to give you a statement in the question, and you want to read the argument first to understand the argument. So don't try to evaluate the argument and the statement's role at the same time. Start with the argument first. Then you want to identify the statement and relate it to the basic argument elements, such as conclusion, subconclusion, premise, etc. So this is why you always want to try and understand the argument first, and then go back and identify the statement and what its role is. If you're unsure of what the conclusion is, then you want to just look to the elements around the statement and try to see what their role is to that statement. Once again, evaluate the types to get the idea of the basic structure of an argument, and being sensitive to the different types of arguments is going to make it easier to recognize the relationships between the statements. And then you want to go through the answer choices, looking for the one which describes the role of the statement. The correct choice will accurately describe what the statement does in the argument. The incorrect choice will assign it a different function than the one it actually has. It may be a role of a different statement, or a role that doesn't appear in the argument at all. So you want to be careful. Okay, so in terms of basic variations, so you may have standard or simple arguments, and you see here on the right we've got an argument pulled up, and I don't have any statements because I'll use the whole argument to illustrate the different types of statements you might find. So the argument basically says that online dating allows you to more easily identify who you're compatible with. A lot of people lie on those apps. Even so, you can more easily verify how compatible you are, and therefore online dating is superior to going out to bars. Okay, so just a quick analysis of the argument here. The last sentence is the conclusion. Online dating is superior to going out to bars. Why? Because it allows you to more easily identify who you're compatible with, and you can more easily verify that even when people lie. So the author could introduce evidence to support a particular perspective. So that would be a standard, straightforward argument. The author just introduces some sort of information to support their perspective or their point of view. And essentially, for these standard or simple arguments, the statement that you're going to be looking for will generally be one of the three standard elements. Maybe a premise, it may be a subconclusion, or it may be a conclusion. So here we have the premise that online dating allows you to more easily identify who you're compatible with. So if they ask you for that in the question, the correct answer would be it provides support, essential support, or it's a premise of the conclusion, etc. The conclusion is online dating is superior to going out to bars. So that would be if they ask for four. Once again, if that's what they ask for, then the correct answer would phrase it in some sense. This is the main conclusion of what the argument is designed to support. I don't actually have a sub-conclusion in this argument, but you want to be careful with the distinguishing between the sub-conclusion and the conclusion. Sometimes that can be tricky. So those are three standard elements you'll find if it's a simple or standard argument where they just present information, they just present evidence and conclude something on the basis of that. However, the statement could also be a potential counter. So it could also be something that's, or it could also be something on the other hand, something that supports the potential counter. So we actually have that here. A potential counter is that a lot of people lie on those apps. So that is a potential challenge to the author's conclusion. The next sentence, that you can more easily verify how compatible you are, is a response to that counter. You could have also had, so that could also be something you could be asked about more rarely. There could also have been evidence as to why it's true that a lot of people land those apps. So that would be support for the potential counter. So that's one way in which they might make it a little bit more complex in these more standard argument structures or argument types, where they simply provide something that is a potential problem and maybe reasons to accept the potential problem, but then also a direct challenge or a sort of additional support for the author's main conclusion that rules out that problem. So these are all things that you might be asked for these more standard or simple arguments. And the statement could also be contexts, and could also be something contextualized by the argument. Now, in addition to that, you may have more complex arguments. So if we look at the one over on the right, it says the Center City Cowboys have decided to trade their replacement quarterback. His salary is too high and they are in financial trouble. But the quarterback is a fan favorite and ticket sales will decrease. Therefore, they shouldn't trade him. So once again, the conclusion here is at the very end. They should not trade him. Why? Because there's going to be a negative consequence, because ticket sales will decrease. And you see, this is what I've labeled the more complex types of arguments, because this argument actually is where the author introduces a perspective, excuse me, and then responds to that perspective, in this case critically, and they usually will respond critically. So the perspective is the proposal or the plan of the Center City Cowboys to trade their quarterback. The response to that is that's going to have a negative consequence. You should not do that. So in these arguments, the statement may still be one of the three standard elements. They might ask for the conclusion that they shouldn't trade him. They might ask for the premise, the quarterback is a fan favorite and ticket sales will decrease. But it could also make reference to the perspective being responded to. So it could actually be that perspective. So they might say, what role does the fact that the Center City Cowboys have decided to trade their replacement quarterback play in the argument? And the correct answer would be, it is the proposal which is being argued against, something along those lines. It could also be the support for that. So that second sentence, his salary is too high and they're in financial trouble, is the reason why they're going to trade him. So correct answer, if that's what you were looking for, the correct answer would be something along the lines of, it is essential support for the proposal being challenged, something along those lines. And likewise, the choice might express that as potentially weakening the overall conclusion. Depends how they phrase it. So instead of being support for what's being challenged, it could just be something that is a potential reason why the challenge may not necessarily be, in this case, why they should trade him as opposed to not trading him because his salary is too high. So that could be phrased that way as well. You could also have situations where it's just an assumption for the perspective being challenged, where they're making the assumption explicit, obviously, but it's something that is essentially an essential premise. You can think of it that way as well. So these are the two basic variations for these role questions, depending on the argument type. It's fairly straightforward. You're basically dealing either with standard elements or elements that are related to an argument that is a response to something. So in terms of the basic summary, the method reasoning role questions basically ask you to identify the function of a given statement. So you need to identify the relationships between the statement in question and the argument, and then you need to identify the correct description of its function. The argument may be standard or simple. The argument may be complex.